Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, which is broadcast from the UK, where summer has finally just arrived. And today I'm going to be talking with Slater Victoroff, founder and CTO of a company called Indico. And he's going to join me on the podcast to talk about his work with artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms, and share his story and how he has been building AI, machine learning and deep learning solutions for the better part of the past decade, having worked with everyone from federal government to two-person startups to Fortune 100 companies. Slater has educated hundreds of business executives on successfully implementing deep learning through a simple framework that helps executives rapidly accelerate the adoption of technology in their business. How? Well, that's just one of the very many things we're going to be discussing today. But enough from me. Buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way stateside so we can speak with Slater about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. My name is Slater Victoroff. I'm the CTO and founder of Indico Data Solutions, and we work in intelligent process automation, building a tool that empowers non-technical business users to build their own cutting-edge AI solutions.
And here in 2021, like you said, you are the founder and CTO of Indico, which is an enterprise AI solution for unstructured content that emphasizes document understanding. But as a geeky podcaster that watches way too many superhero movies, and you do have a name that would actually fit into a lot of superhero movies, I've got to ask, what is your origin story? Can you remember what put you on this path?
I think there were two really big events for me. I think one was my first internship. After my first year in college, I fell backwards, frankly, into an AI project. We had this problem where we were this big learning management solution. So the idea is we had a whole bunch of video content. This was for K through 12 education. It was for college prep, and people had to watch, these videos, thousands and thousands and thousands of videos, and figure out where in this massive learning taxonomy they ended up. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be so useful if we could do this instead by, just using the titles of the videos or, whatever content we were able to extract from them. I didn't realize at the time that it was a machine learning problem, but that kind of set me on this path, and I was lucky enough to set a state of the art in a particular field, which was, frankly, more luck than anything.
I always try and do a little research on each guest before they come onto the podcast, and I believe I need to ask you about an embarrassing celebrity encounter. I mean, is it a story that you can share with me today?
There's more than a couple of them. I'm going to guess that you're talking about that Quora question. Which, I think that's more than fair, since the story is out there. So, many years ago, I was at South by Southwest, and I was at, one of these VC parties, which, it was a lot of fun. There were a lot of really cool people there. And, a couple of my investors, one of them was hosting and a couple of them were attending. Someone goes over to me at some point in kind of a hushed tone, says, "Mark Cuban's over here." And, here I am, and this is something that, some people know about me, but I am almost staggeringly ignorant of pop culture. So I say, "Who's Mark Cuban? Who's that?" Which now I kind of realize many years later is a little bit of an embarrassing thing to say, but they're just like, "Oh, he's really, really cool. You've got to meet him, and I get the sense that he's, some big shot investor. There's a lot of them out there. So, I go up, I maybe act a little bit more intoxicated than I am. And I use it as this sort of opportunity to really, talk up a strong game about our AI. And, I actually, he was a great guy. It was a really, really pleasant conversation. And, we got coffee the next day. I guess there's more to that story, but that's maybe the better half of it.
I love it. And of course, here we are now in 2021. What kind of problems are you solving for businesses at Indico? Just for anyone that could be tuning in and hearing about you guys for the first time.
Yep. So we focus, as I mentioned, on this idea of intelligent process automation. Yeah. And for us, the center of the target there is really documents. And documents, they sound kind of boring, but what's very interesting about them from a machine learning perspective, right, is that documents are fundamentally the fusion of text and image information. So, in addition to handling documents, we separately handle also text and image. So when you think about Indico, the way that we like to talk about ourselves is a bionic arm for the knowledge worker. A very simple example here might be something like invoice processing. That's kind of on the simpler side of the spectrum in terms of use cases that we solve. And then, on the more complex side, you can think loan applications, you can think structured settlement agreements, right? A lot of use cases throughout banking and the rest of BFSI broadly. But really with the center of the target being these document-centric use cases. And our approach really is it's a place where the subject matter expert is placed in the center of the application. So everything is driven by them. Our primary goal really is to empower them to make the processes that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, work better and more effectively. And our product sort of serves as a fabric between them and the broader organization, be that data science or IT or often both.
And a question I've got to ask is, how can Indico compete with some of those big tech giants such as Microsoft, AWS, Google, and IBM? Because it must be a huge challenge for you guys.
Absolutely, and this is something that I do think is it's fun. They keep us on our toes, certainly. I think one thing that people often miss is that just as much opportunity comes with additional resources at a large organization, significant constraints come with that as well. And when you look at the kinds of research that academics are interested in doing relative to the kinds of research that are useful in really, say, empowering non-technical individuals, right? There's a gap between those two. And I think at a large organization, because they tend to be significantly more siloed, it means your ability to do really interesting cross-cutting, systems level research that, goes across modern ML and user experience is actually severely limited. And one of the things that I think people don't necessarily respect or recognize enough today is that a lot of what is relevant in the AI space centers around new forms of supervision, right? So, AI has gotten good enough that if you've got a really strict, well-defined classification task that a human can solve as framed, right? We're actually very, very good at solving those kinds of problems. And, for most strict metrics you can define, it even looks like we're approaching or exceeding human performance in a lot of those cases. This I sometimes call the clever Hans effect, which I didn't come up with, but I think it's a really, really good term. On the one hand, they're achieving these really, really high levels of accuracy. On the other hand, you can almost put any 5-year-old down in front of one of these systems, give them a couple of minutes, and they can get it to do something really embarrassingly wrong. So I say at the same time that they show this staggering brilliance, right, they also exhibit a kind of stunning ignorance. And it's one of the fundamental paradoxes of ML right now. And my view is that the source of this really comes down to improper supervision, right? Is that when we look at the ways that people instruct one another, it's very, very far from marking something as true or false in a classification task, right? It's not looking at an invoice and saying, this is good, this is bad. Right. It's looking at an invoice and it's saying, hey, I extracted, I'm extracting this total from here because it's to the right of the thing that says total. Right. It's this really actually sophisticated blended reasoning across the semantic information and the physical layout of the document. And it gets more, invoices are kind of a simple example, but you can imagine there are more complex use cases as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think for the most part, smaller businesses are so much more agile and can hone in on niche audiences and move so much faster than those big tech behemoths. But for business leaders that are listening that are outside of the tech industry, can you expand a little on the effect of AI on automation processes?
Absolutely. So I think when you talk about automation, there are several different categories you've got to kind of break it up into. I think on the one side, you've got, maybe more traditional software and IT automation, right? And this is where you see a lot of the new DevOps tools, right? A lot of orchestration layers and things like that. And I think those tools are, they're excellent, super, super mature. There's limited application of AI in those areas, right? Around, load prediction and things like that. Frankly, it's a space where most of the challenges are engineering centric and they're not that AI centric. So then you can talk about, say, robotic process automation. And that's where you have, highly deterministic kind of screen-based, copy this value, paste it here, click this, click that kind of processes, right? If, listeners are familiar with Selenium, it's something very, very much along those lines. And that's another place where there are some limited areas for AI, right? Certainly in understanding what's on the page, but a lot of the really relevant problems are either user experience centered or engineering centered. Now, that changes really, really sharply when you start talking about intelligent process automation. And that's the thing, is that for intelligent process automation, some people call this intelligent document processing. AI is front and center, right? It is really the main piece, because when it comes to these unstructured use cases, we just don't have the tools in traditional software to deal with these probabilistic, again, fuzzy, non-deterministic problems. Like, you need AI, and generally you need modern kind of deep learning solutions to effectively get after that. That's not strictly the case, but that's a 90% kind of rule. And I think that that's one of the things that makes intelligent process automation that much more difficult than the traditional pieces, right? You can't really attach AI as, it's a nice additional feature where you can, predict load a little bit better, right? Calibrate your screen processing a little bit better and get sort of marginal improvements. It's something where really you do need to bake it in from day one, and power kind of the whole system. And one of the things that we've also found really, really key is that a lot of people talk about explainability in AI, and sort of similarly, explainability when you look at traditional automation is, I'd say, a bit of an afterthought, because again, they're very deterministic, straightforward processes. It clicked the wrong button. That's explainable enough in and of itself. But the same is not necessarily true in the AI space. And one thing that we found is that you fundamentally can't get to a good explanation of why an AI did something without transparency into the model, and really importantly, the data that the model is trained on. And that's one thing that we think is going to become a bigger and bigger emphasis for organizations as they continue to adopt AI more broadly, is this idea of explainability and really supporting transparency.
And something else I wanted to highlight today was, I believe Indico recently announced a $22 million Series B raise. So I've got to ask, are there any tips you can offer any startup founders that listening that could be at the beginning of their journey, looking for funding and looking for advice on doing that? Is there anything that you learned on your journey so far?
Oh my goodness. There's so much that I have learned about fundraising over the years. I frankly couldn't summarize it all. What I would say is that, don't think about fundraising as an end goal, right? I think that's one place where a lot of founders kind of get the wrong idea, is that they look at a big raise and they use that as a metric of success. And I think that the longer you build companies, right, the more times you fundraise, the more you realize that's really, really not the case. And a fundraise really is, it's a ticket to play. And it's a place where, I would say, don't let yourself be defined by the exceptions to the rule, right? You can always find these insane companies, right, that, raise $100 million pre-revenue or some such absurd thing, right? Maybe they've got a good reason for that. But don't go into the process assuming that you're going to be one of those, right? Because it's a good way to get disillusioned very, very quickly. And I think, the best piece of advice I guess I can give is you don't think about fundraising like sales. In sales, if you go out and you talk to 10 people and 5 of them say no, that's a bad day. Fundraising, though, you really only need one. It's kind of, people talk about fundraising a lot like sort of finding a partner or a marriage. And, it's maybe not 100% accurate, but there's a lot of truth in that analogy. And so that's what I like to say, you only need to find one. So, if you're having difficulty fundraising and you've talked to, only a dozen VCs or so, you haven't really begun the process yet, in my book, right? And things haven't begun to get truly difficult until you've met, 100 investors. At least done 100, very, very strong concerted cold outreaches. But, most VC firms, they want deals as bad as you want an investor. It is a mutual thing more than anything.
And if I was to ask you to look into your virtual crystal ball, what does the future of AI and automation look like to you? And what can businesses expect, and how can they prepare for that future?
So I think that there are two real themes that are very central to us at Indico. One is this notion of the citizen data scientist. And this is an idea that's, very heavily championed by Gartner, but others as well. And it's this notion that in the future, because data science and ML talent is so rarefied, the winners are going to be those that can empower, sort of their citizens, right? So folks that don't necessarily have PhDs in AI or maybe aren't even programmers, right? Their ability to empower them to do productive work in this space. And that is something that I think there has to be a lot more emphasis on going forward. And I think one of the key limitations there is, and I talked a little bit about this earlier, when we talk about new methods of supervision. We talk about how do you let these non-technical people responsibly build AI in a way that they understand, a way that is effective, and again, a way that is fundamentally responsible and ethical, because those things, they don't happen automatically. You have to very consciously build controls in to make sure that they happen. So I think that's one piece that's very, very big. I think the other is that, there's this notion I really enjoy called the data spectrum. And more broadly, I think today people very often think about machine learning only in terms of, very crisp, gold standard data, right? And, they've got a very limited view, I think, of what they mean when they talk about labeled data, right? And when they talk about providing that to a model. And I think that when we look forward, and we've already started to see a lot of flavors of this, when we look at transfer learning, obviously which Indico uses very, very heavily, when we look at synthetic data techniques and GANs, I think that the data tapestry of the future, especially in the unstructured space, looks radically more complex than the very simple sort of map-reduced jobs that we're used to. And I think that folks aren't necessarily prepared for that right now. I think that people are trying to solve unstructured as sort of business as usual. But I think as unstructured moves from kind of early mover advantage to something where if you don't have unstructured capabilities, you're going to be left behind. The whole data pipeline and transparency maintained through that complex data pipeline, it's just a huge issue that folks need to be forward investing into in my book.
And something I also wanted to highlight is how we educate the next generation, because we currently have a new generation who are in education studying for jobs that don't actually exist yet. So how do you think we can better prepare those people, and how can we make STEM more inclusive so that everyone can come along for the ride?
It's a great question, and it's a place where I really wish that I had the answer, right? And I think if I had the answer, I'd be doing that instead of this. But I do think that there are a couple of things that certainly when I look back on my journey through STEM and sort of things that I saw that I think certainly make it a lot harder. Right. And I think for me, I actually went through most of my school journey, right? And this will be a surprise to folks, thinking that I was, quite bad at math, right? Not particularly talented in STEM broadly, right? And, I didn't do any engineering at all or any programming until I got to undergrad. So I would say in a lot of ways I had a good education, but certainly the traditional education system in sort of K through 12 was not a good fit for me as an individual. I think one of the really key things missing, certainly looking at the US education system, and I know, every country is a bit different here, and I think Finland does a much better job here, but it's this notion of sort of self-determination. In my entire sort of career through high school, I had something like 2 electives. And I think that when, as a student, you have so little control over what it is you decide to study, and so little depth that's offered to you, and so it's kind of few opportunities for acceleration, it's very, very hard to get excited for education when you're trying to very much feed everyone through this one-size-fits-all system. Granted, it worked poorly for me. I think it works poorly for other folks. I do think self-determination is very helpful in making it more inclusive because it sort of eliminates the problem with gatekeeping. But I'm all ears generically on this. I think that we need to be doing more. And, frankly, we've got too many problems to solve as a society, right? As a kind of culture on Earth to be picking and choosing who gets to help.
100% with you on that. And we started this podcast talking about your origin story. And before I let you go, a question I always like to ask my guests is ask them a song or piece of music that has inspired them in their past, been the soundtrack to their life, helped them in their career, or just helped them get in the zone before going on stage or going into a big meeting. Is there a particular song that resonates with you that you'd like to share with everyone?
So probably too many songs to mention, but I will share one that I've been loving quite a lot lately. I would say it's a pretty weird one, but I think it's really excellent. It's called Did, D-I-D, and it's a collaboration between Cosmo Sheldrake and an artist called Don't.
Ooh, okay. I've not heard that one. I'm looking forward to getting that one on the playlist. That'll be
that's
soundtrack to my afternoon.
It's very, very cool. I think it's a little bit out there. I've been a huge fan of Cosmo Sheldrake for many years.
Fantastic. Well, I'll add that to the list. And before I let you go, can you remind everyone listening of where they can find Indico online and also contact your team if they've got any questions?
Absolutely. So you can find us at indico.io. Also, feel free to drop us a note on LinkedIn or Twitter, Indico or Indico Data.
Well, I'll add those links to the show notes just so people can find you nice and easily. I think we've covered so much today in a short amount of time, and we've even covered your story, bumping into Mark Cuban. I think we'll have to get you back on for part 2 of that story. But more than anything, thank you for sitting down and sharing that with me today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
A huge thank you to Slater for taking time to come on the podcast today, sharing his story, talking about the future of AI, machine learning, the effect of AI on automation processes, and how Indico is successfully competing with tech giants such as Microsoft, AWS, Google, IBM and co. And I think it was a beautiful moment to end on about talking about making STEM more inclusive, especially when we've got kids now that are studying in education for jobs that don't actually exist yet. And there are so many roles that they think they might want to do that won't be there when they leave school. Kids are in such a difficult position right now. So a big thank you to Slater for sharing his insights around that. And equally, everyone listening, wherever you are in the world, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Keep your messages coming in, and I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. So thank you for listening and allowing me to be the soundtrack to your day. And hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow. So thanks for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.